In the autumn of 1992, construction crews widening a freeway south of San Diego cut into the earth and uncovered the bones of an ancient mastodon. At first, it looked like a routine fossil discovery. Then the excavation team noticed something that should not have been there. The bones had not simply decayed or collapsed under pressure. Several of the mastodon's massive limb bones appeared to have been broken while still fresh. The fractures spiraled through the bone, the kind of damage that can occur when heavy force is applied soon after death. Nearby, researchers found 5 large stones resting in fine sediment where they did not seem to belong. The stones showed signs of impact. To the team from the San Diego Natural History Museum, they looked like hammerstones and anvils, as if someone had placed the bones on the stones and struck them open. That interpretation was already controversial. Then the dating results arrived. The site was not 13,000 years old. It was approximately 130,000 years old. If the researchers were right, someone had processed that mastodon in California more than 100,000 years before the people traditionally described as the first Americans. And that raised a question archaeology had spent decades trying to avoid. What if the accepted history of the first people in the Americas was wrong? For most of the 20th century, the answer seemed settled. According to the Clovis first model, the earliest people entered North America from Siberia near the end of the last ice age. They crossed the region known as Beringia, moved south as the ice sheets retreated, and spread across the continent roughly 13,000 years ago. Their distinctive stone spear points were first identified near Clovis, New Mexico, so they became known as the Clovis people. And for decades they were treated as the beginning of human history in the Americas. Anything older was viewed with suspicion. To claim that people had arrived thousands of years before Clovis was not simply to suggest a new date, it was to challenge an entire migration story. That is why the discovery beneath State Route 54 caused such a fierce reaction. The site was named after paleontologist Richard Cerutti, who had been monitoring the construction work when the bones appeared. Over the following months, researchers carefully excavated the remains of a single mastodon. The arrangement troubled them. 2 broken femur heads lay side by side, one facing upward and the other downward. The large stones appeared battered. Bone fragments were scattered around them in patterns the team believed were difficult to explain through natural processes alone. To the researchers, the site resembled a place where an intelligent being had deliberately broken the bones, but they knew how extraordinary that sounded. When their findings were published in 2017, they did not claim that modern humans had lived in California 130,000 years ago. They could not. Instead, they proposed that an unidentified member of the genus Homo may have created the site, some earlier branch of the human family, a population never before imagined in North America. The scientific response was immediate. Critics pointed out that the site had been exposed by heavy construction machinery. Could bulldozers and earth-moving equipment have broken the bones? Others argued that pressure, geological movement, trampling, or natural impacts might produce similar fracture patterns over enormous spans of time. And the stones? Perhaps they were not tools at all. Perhaps they were simply rocks. The Cerutti Mastodon Site remains deeply controversial, but the controversy mattered for another reason. It forced archaeologists to look again at discoveries that had been dismissed for years. Because Cerutti was not the only site that seemed to fall outside the accepted timeline. Nearly 3,000 miles north in the Yukon, 3 small caves overlooked the Bluefish River. This was once part of Beringia, the cold grassland that connected Asia and North America when sea levels fell during the Ice Age. Between 1977 and 1987, archaeologist Jacques Cinq-Mars excavated thousands of animal bones from the Bluefish Caves. Among them, he believed he saw cut marks, signs that human beings had butchered horses, caribou, and other animals long before Clovis. Some of the bones appeared to be around 30,000 years old. At the time, few archaeologists were prepared to accept that possibility. The caves contained no obvious hearths, no clear living floor, few recognizable stone tools. Cinq-Mars's interpretation was dismissed, and Bluefish became another warning about seeing human activity where none existed. Then, decades later, the old bones were examined again. French archaeologist Lauriane Bourgeon studied more than 30,000 fragments using modern analytical methods. On the jawbone of an ancient horse, she identified a series of straight, parallel cuts positioned exactly where a stone blade would be used to remove the animal's tongue. The marks did not resemble carnivore damage. They did not look like trampling. They looked deliberate. The bone was radiocarbon dated to approximately 24,000 years ago. Suddenly, Bluefish Caves became evidence that people may have lived in Beringia nearly 10,000 years before Clovis. The findings supported the idea of a Beringian standstill, a population isolated in the far north for thousands of years while ice blocked the route into the rest of the continent. Bluefish still has critics, but the old certainty was weakening. Then came another cave. High in the mountains of northern Mexico, nearly 3,000 meters above sea level, archaeologists excavated Chiquihuite Cave. Deep beneath layers of sediment, they recovered almost 2,000 pieces of fractured limestone. Researchers interpreted many of them as tools: flakes, blades, points, cores. The dates were astonishing. Some layers appeared to be more than 30,000 years old, while the strongest evidence clustered around 26,500 years ago. But Chiquihuite had a serious weakness. There were no human bones, no human DNA, no clearly associated hearths. The case depended almost entirely on the stones. Critics argued that the objects were geofacts, naturally broken rocks that only resembled tools. The cave sat beneath a cliff where rockfall and moving debris could fracture limestone again and again. Supporters responded that many pieces showed intentional shaping and traces of use. The debate remains unresolved, yet the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. At site after site, the same question returned. Did human hands shape this evidence, or did nature only make it appear that way? Along the Savannah River in South Carolina, that question became even more extreme. The Topper site was already known for its Clovis occupation when archaeologist Albert Goodyear decided to dig beneath it. Below the Clovis layer, he found artifacts dating to around 16,000 years ago. That alone suggested people had lived in the region before Clovis. Then, he dug deeper. Nearly 4 meters below the surface, his team found more fractured stone beside a dark stain containing burned plant material. Radiocarbon testing produced dates near 50,000 years. If the stones were tools and the charcoal came from a human fire, people had occupied South Carolina tens of thousands of years earlier than accepted history allowed. But the weaknesses were obvious. 50,000 years approaches the practical limit of radiocarbon dating. The charcoal may have come from a natural wildfire, and critics once again argued that the stones were geofacts. Some also noted that the supposed tools looked almost unchanged across tens of thousands of years. Real technologies evolve. These did not seem to. Topper remains a question mark, but the next site went far beyond 50,000 years. In the Mojave Desert, the Calico early man site attracted the attention of Louis Leakey, one of the most famous scientists ever to study human origins. Leakey believed the Americas had been populated far earlier than the accepted timeline suggested. At Calico, excavators recovered thousands of fractured stones they interpreted as tools. The deposits were dated to roughly 200,000 years. Some estimates went even further. If correct, toolmakers had lived in California before modern humans had fully emerged elsewhere in the world. Most archaeologists rejected the claim. No human bones were found, no unquestionable living surfaces. Geologists argued that ancient rivers and debris flows had fractured the stones naturally. Even Mary Leakey doubted her husband's interpretation and feared the site had damaged his reputation. Today, Calico is generally viewed as a cautionary story, a reminder that even a brilliant scientist can become too attached to an idea. But one site in Mexico produced dates even more difficult to comprehend. At Hueyatlaco, archaeologists uncovered finely made stone tools among the remains of Ice Age animals. Unlike Calico, no one seriously doubted that the tools had been made by humans. The problem was the age of the surrounding deposits. Because there was little material suitable for radiocarbon dating, geologists tested volcanic ash and sediments using several other methods. The results centered around 260,000 years. Some reached approximately 370,000. The dates would place skilled toolmakers in Mexico hundreds of thousands of years before accepted migration models allowed. Critics argued that ancient volcanic material had been mixed into younger layers, creating misleading results. Supporters insisted the dating had been carried out correctly. Hueyatlaco remains unsolved. The tools are real. The extreme dates are disputed, and the exact relationship between them has never been securely established. So where does that leave the story? A freeway in San Diego, caves in the Yukon and Mexico, a riverbank in South Carolina, a desert site defended by Louis Leakey, a basin filled with Ice Age bones. Some claims may be wrong, some may never be resolved. But while archaeologists argued over stones and fractures, the ground produced something much harder to dismiss. At White Sands in New Mexico, researchers found human footprints preserved in ancient mud. Adults, children, teenagers, people walking along the edge of a vanished lake. These were not stones that might have fractured naturally. They were not bones that might have been broken by machines. They were footprints, direct evidence that human beings had stood there. The first dating came from seeds embedded in the same layers. The result was between 21 and 23,000 years. Because the finding was so important, researchers tested it again. They examined pollen, quartz grains, mud samples, different laboratories, different methods. The results converged. The footprints were thousands of years older than Clovis. White Sands did not prove Cerutti. It did not validate Calico. It did not solve Hueyatlaco. But it changed the central question. The Americas were no longer empty before Clovis. People had been there much earlier. Now the mystery was how much earlier, and how they arrived. The disputed sites may never all be accepted. Some may disappear from the story entirely. Others may be waiting for the evidence that finally proves them. But together, they forced archaeology to reopen a door that had once been nailed shut. That may be their greatest contribution. Not that every extraordinary claim was correct, but that certainty gave way to investigation. Somewhere beneath another road, inside another cave, or buried below a riverbank no one has yet examined, the next piece of the story may still be waiting. And when it is found, it may push the human timeline backward once again.